Hey everyone, it's Denise Braun from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thanks so much for joining us. I've been introducing you to presenters for the Caring Conference, our Courageous Acts, and I'm thrilled and delighted to introduce you to Donna Thomson. Hi, Donna.
Hi, Denise. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be here.
So you're going to be presenting on November 12th, and I should mention that you actually recently joined one of our other podcasts, our Caregiving Book Club, and your co-author, Zachary White, joined you to talk about your book, which is The Unexpected Journey of Caring. I want to mention too that you have another book that you've published, which is The Four Walls of My Freedom. So not only are you a author, blogger, advocate, you're also a researcher. You're also a family caregiver.
Yes, I am. All of those things.
So you're going to talk to us on November 12th at the conference about the role of courage and caregiver trauma recovery. I want to let you know that my favorite word is in your title, which is recovery. And I love that. We can recover. And you're going to really focus in on parents who care for children who have chronic care needs. And that's you.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So tell us about trauma and your caregiving experience.
Well, I recently became very interested in the topic of trauma because I began to work as a parent partner and co-investigator on a research project looking at an intervention or a therapeutic treatment for parents of children with very complex needs where in situations in which the parents were experiencing symptoms of PTSD. And in the course of this project, I realized that I had had PTSD. And I didn't know that that's what it was. But in understanding and learning about how trauma in caring works, I began to understand that the traumas that I had experienced as a young person with my father at home, who had had 3 strokes and lost his speech and his mobility, etc. I began to understand how those experiences of fear and helplessness got mixed up in my mind when Nicholas, our son, was born with disabilities. And to give you an example, it's actually a slide from our research project, which is called Life Beyond Trauma. And it's a slide that shows what happened to me, actually. And so what happened was that I was home alone with my dad, and I was about 17, maybe, or 16. And my dad had had his strokes. So he was sitting in the chair in the living room, and I was in my bedroom down the hall. And I heard my father make a noise that scared me. It didn't sound normal. So I came out of my bedroom and I went down the hall, and I came to the opening of the hall into the living room, and I saw my father. And he had his head back and into the side, and his eyes were rolling back, and he was shaking. And I thought I was seeing my father dying. And I didn't know what to do. So I was just, anyway, it turned out I called an ambulance and everything and called my mom, who was at work. And it turned out that my father had had a seizure, not a stroke. But I had never seen anybody have a seizure. So fast forward to Nicholas's very first day of preschool. Because he had severe disabilities, he started a specialized preschool at age 2. He was only 2 years old. And it was the first day since he was born that he went on a school bus and I was alone at home with a coffee and a newspaper for the first time, where normally I would never be able to finish my shower before I had to get out of the So I was enjoying just this moment, the first moment of respite, and the phone rang, and it was the school director, and said that Nicholas has had a seizure and he's not responsive and he's on his way to the hospital. And Nicholas had never had a seizure before. And so I thought I was back with my father. And I got in the car and I went into the hospital through the sliding doors, and I could hear Nicholas crying. He was yelling, and I thought, he's fine, right? And then after that, every single time the phone rang, I had a panic attack. It didn't matter even if Nicholas was like right beside me. I just thought, oh, somebody's dying. The phone rang, and it got mixed up in my head. So I now understand that what trauma is, how it works in caring. Because if you witness someone who has had a life-threatening event, as many, many, many of us have, and you begin to have that impair your memory, and you cannot remember that incident in isolation of other traumatic events in your life. So I came to understand through partnering on this study that PTSD is a memory problem. And in order to fix it, one needs to revisit these memories, which is very hard to do. And it takes a lot of courage to go through the necessary steps to separate the memories from each other and understand that that was a single event that does not have to do with other events in your life. Because there is this effect of building blocks that you don't get better at handling traumatic events as a caregiver, you get worse. And little events will knock you down behind the knees if you've experienced a lot of trauma. So it's the courage that I really want to talk about at this conference, of facing up to your demons and healing them.
And you know, it's interesting. I love that you are explaining this as a memory problem, because I think what happens is we're trying to make sense of situations. We're trying to find the cause so that we can connect to a fix. And if the cause is a phone call, right, then we're like, well, just don't answer the phone, right? Or just respond differently. It's the phone call. I guess in our mind, we're just trying to make sense of what does not make sense.
Yes. And the other thing that, I think we become, we labor under the idea that this thing is going to happen again, or something very like it. And we need to be constantly prepared for that.
Yes.
And that hypervigilance and that fear and dread. And we can begin to have triggers for these feelings and memories that begin to, one time on that phone call, that initial phone call, if I happen to also be peeling an orange, then oranges become the symbol of. So it gets mixed up in our heads in the way that is a human response to a fight or flight proper response to the initial event. But then these symptoms of post-traumatic stress become our enemy because they harm us, and they harm our competence and confidence as caregivers. But I know plenty of people that I said that I know have PTSD. And I said to them, are you interested in joining this study? Do you want to do the 90-minute therapy sessions to recover from this? I have one friend who she just cannot go in the hospital without running to the public, washroom to vomit. And she said, no, I just can't, I cannot. And I don't think she probably will be able to until her son dies. And her son is palliative now. Sometimes you can't recover until after caregiving,
So it's interesting to me too. We experience this trauma, and then we go back to our life, so to speak. We go back to work. You probably went back to high school after your father's seizure.
Yeah.
We continue to these everyday activities with a very unordinary, extraordinary emotion that we're carrying with us. And people don't get it. And I often think when we talk about taking care of family caregivers, we need care every day, and we need extra special care after a crisis.
Yeah.
Because that's when we have time to sit back a little bit and say, you know what I just saw in the hospital, or you know what happened before I called 911. That's when you want to decompress and talk about it. And that's when everybody's like, crisis is over, get back to work. We got things to do. We don't have time for this. And really, that's when I think it would be helpful.
Yeah. Or they'll say, like in my dad's case, well, that was just a seizure. And, seizures are pretty normal for people who have had strokes. And then you think, okay, it's normal. And why am I having a big reaction to this? Or the person recovers like Nick did. He woke up. He's fine. Go home. It's all fine now. And like I always say that, your kids, or even my mom too, she would have like a big, huge health event. She had C. diff 3 times and we nearly lost her and everything. And being in the hospital with her so sick, thinking that she's going to die. So all of these things, but then they recover and they're like moving on. Next thing, what are we going to do for fun now? And you're like in a puddle on the floor. It's very difficult to recover from those things, especially when everybody's telling you, well, the person you care for is much better, so you should be better too. And this is normal for their condition. So what does that message tell you? That is not normal to witness.
No, it's not a normal event in your house. It wasn't a normal event for your father, and it wasn't a normal event for you.
No.
It's interesting because I used to, in the chat room I used to manage, I would always connect with a young family caregiver who cared for her husband. And we would always talk about her trauma because of his seizures. She would be on the floor with him thinking he is going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a significant event.
Oh, yes.
And then to worry about that going forward makes sense. Of course, you're going to worry about that. And oftentimes what people will say about your worries is, well, you know what they say, 90% of what you worry about doesn't happen. And that is not applicable to our caregiving experience.
No, it's not.
Because the 10% happens to us all the time. So we are constantly in a state of managing what others don't experience, but becomes something that we experience on a regular basis. And it's interesting when you think about how it all stacks on top of each
Stacks
other.
up. It's called the building block effect of trauma. And, so in thinking about courage too, in thinking about this messaging that you're supposed to pick yourself up once your loved one starts breathing again, is recovered. Maybe one of the messages about courage too is that it takes courage to say, I am not okay. I am not okay. Because there's so much messaging about, well, what's your problem? Your loved one is better, but you have experienced a trauma. And I think it does take courage to push back and say, I am not okay. I need to process this and I need help to process it. Because I'm not going to be so good the next time this happens.
You are helping me understand something more about a concept that's taking hold here in the United States, which is hospital at home. So they want individuals who could be hospitalized to instead stay home. And whenever I hear anybody talk about it, no one ever talks about the family caregiver, the impact on the family. It's all the patient wants this. Well, of course, but however, it's the family caregiver that has to move the furniture so they can make room for the hospital bed and schedule the staffing. And you know what else? There's a chance that another trauma is going to happen during that hospital at home situation.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Who's going to provide the additional emotional support for the family as they experience yet another trauma? Right? I mean, yeah.
So that's not built into the model.
No, not at all. There's no training. There's no support. There's no respite fund. There's no help with trying to juggle the schedule of, do I work? Do I caregiver? I'm, all of a sudden I'm a hospital tech in my house. It's so, which also makes me think, we think about trauma for healthcare professionals because I think about the trauma they experience every day.
Me too.
Here's the difference. They're in a setting where the trauma is expected, so to speak. I don't mean to minimize their trauma, but it's in a trauma hospital, for instance. But in your house, you never think that kind of trauma is going to happen.
No. But I also think I was presenting at a bioethics conference last week, and we were talking about, well, there were different people presenting. I was talking about the essential family caregiver presence during COVID, but another presenter, Dr. Sarah Carter from bioethicist, was talking about the moral injury suffered by healthcare workers during COVID.
Oh, gosh.
Result of trying to, by proxy, be. And this is to try to represent the family alone with a dying patient. This has caused to these healthcare workers who just can't stop crying. It's terrible.
It's awful. I think about the pressure that they've been under to do these extraordinary things. And then, especially here in the United States, they go out into the community and it's a battle over wearing a mask or getting a vaccine. And I would think you just feel like your whole experience is so minimized. Because if they spent an hour in the hospital and saw what it was like, I don't think there would be any pushback on masks and vaccines.
No, I don't think so. So much suffering. And the natural response to that is, how can we stop this suffering? How can we minimize this suffering? And of course, the answer is vaccines.
Yeah.
It is, it's invisible to a lot of people if they don't know somebody who's gone through it.
So how do we as family caregivers recover from trauma?
So, the analogy that I make is that if all of your experiences are files you need to empty the filing cabinet, and you need to pick them up one by one and look at them and think about them and file them in a different order. One that makes sense and isn't harming you. So in the intervention that we did, it was a therapeutic 90-minute therapy online, supervised coach, so a medical professional, which makes it very much cheaper if you're going to give it to everybody who needs it. So we were testing that method. Anyway, so what they did was they used this thing called a lifeline, which is an image of a rope. And on the rope, the person would place a stone. You can move these things around. So a stone on the beginning of the rope for an early memory of a traumatic event, followed by a flower, which would be a happy event, followed by a candle, which would be a sad but not traumatic event. So you think about the life and you plot your life on this lifeline, which represents a rope. And then, of course, you remember and you tell the coach about what happened with this stone. And it could be an unwanted sexual, advance, or a car accident, or a divorce, or anything, but you talk about it, and then you talk about the next thing that might not be traumatic. You begin to look at these things in their proper order. And I'm saying it very, very simply, but there's an awful lot of evidence-based science behind this approach for trauma recovery. But it does take courage to go through it. It does take courage to say, okay, I'm going to look at these very, very painful events in my life. I'm going to describe them to someone else, and I'm going to essentially relive them.
I'm wondering about a piece of this, which is the piece where we blame ourselves for not doing more or enough or not knowing enough. And I wonder how that plays into our trauma. This idea that we should have been almost like a god and gone in and saved our family member so that they didn't have this medical episode or this crisis.
Yeah, I think there is, there's an awful lot of that. And I think one of the big takeaways that is in itself so healing for families in this study, it was for me, that I now understand and forgive myself for not being better at managing trauma now. Because I've experienced so much that, what's the matter with me? My dog had an operation because she swallowed a toy and it got stuck in her intestines. I thought I was going to die of stress because of Nicholas's surgeries having gone wrong. And I thought, oh my God, I can't bear this. It's, and I had a crazy big reaction to my dog's surgery. That's typical of anybody who has been in the hospital a lot and seen post-operative pain and suffering in somebody they love. It's so natural. But now I realize that, oh, that's why I'm so bad at it. And I think, oh, poor baby. And I forgive myself. Also to explain, guess what? I'm going to need some support. And it's fine.
Yeah. What a compassionate viewpoint for us to keep. toward others and toward ourselves.
Mhm.
Because we connect with people in a moment, but we haven't seen all the moments that lead up to that moment. And oftentimes we make a decision or a judgment based on that moment's experience without realizing all that really created that moment. And
Oh, that's so true.
it's the trauma, right, that is
Yeah.
creating that reaction.
Yes. And this is a call for trauma-informed care for caregivers too. I mean, clinicians and healthcare providers should know that likely, more than likely, we have experienced trauma. So I think too, just the courage to be vulnerable, to be compassionate for ourselves, that takes courage. Like, what happens to our defenses if we let them down and say, I'm not good at managing life-threatening situations anymore. Like, I froze the last time, or it takes me too long to recover the next big crisis. I'm not okay to bring my husband or my father home from the hospital because I am not okay from what just happened, because of the 30 other times this happened. Even in my childhood, I'm not okay. Like when the doctor told me that Nicholas had epilepsy, I fainted.
Oh,
I
yeah.
fainted in the hospital. I fell to the floor. And they're going like, what's the matter with this woman? Right? How could they know?
Right, they wouldn't know. And then the judgment is the child safe with the parent? What kind of interventions do we have to do? I mean,
Exactly.
it's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's just a nightmare. It's just
Yeah.
a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are helping me understand better someone who is a member of my family. And I know that I am gentle with her.
Mm.
And I understand now all the trauma she's experienced, which I've always known. But sometimes if you don't talk in this way about it, it's hard to understand why someone needs a little gentler care at certain times in their life.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's the wound, the trauma wound is too fresh right now for her.
Okay. I sure. Yeah, I do.
It
And
just,
it could be still too fresh in another 20 years too, though.
well, that's just it, right? And it's not for me to determine what the healing process is or judge the healing process. And I think that's what's so amazing about this, is just to know that sometimes trauma takes a long time to heal from, especially
Mhm.
when she has had traumatic situations with her parents over a period of decades. I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
that's not going to heal. Yeah.
It like it's hard to say. Those events can never be not exist. Like, they exist. But I have seen a real shift in understanding this is this and that is that. That's the past and this is the present. Separate things. And I'm going to look at this situation, not going to be consumed past events in the moment now and think that the same thing is going to happen again. I know that you can recover to that extent.
And I love that, because it's a reminder that we also are different in this present moment. So we might have different resources, we might have different wisdom, we might have different support, we might have a different energy level. So whatever happens in this moment, even if it's similar to what happened in the past, we can be different in how the experience plays out because we're different.
And sometimes I know people who have cared for both parents, say both parents have different cancers. First, then the mother gets cancer. And it is very difficult to think, to get those experiences mixed up in your head. And that what happened to dad is going to happen to mom. And I need happening. But it's two people are different people, and experiences are different too, as much as we are different as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We went longer than I intended to, but it was so fascinating. It was so fascinating. This was wonderful. So your presentation is the afternoon of Friday, November 12th. And for anyone who'd like to join us, the conference is free. We're doing 25-minute workshops because we're going to present you with a variety of perspectives around courage and invite you to join in the conversation. And you can go to caregiversacademy.com for more information about how to join us. And Donna, for our listeners and viewers who'd like to reach out to you, what's your website address?
It's the Caregivers Living Room, and it's www.donnathomson.com, and there's no P in Thompson, so it's Donna Thomson.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Donna. It was great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, so much for watching and listening. I'm Denise Brown. See you November 12th. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.